But she said, I appreciate you after the cut going to your actors first, because I need to go to my camera team and we need to discuss stuff. This is great information. I'm always going to do that. I'm going to go tend to the actors. You're going to go tend to your team. And then we're going to come back and say, all right, this is what I need. This is what I need. Let's make that happen.
Hi, everyone. This is Cinematography for Actors podcast. I'm your host, Haeleigh. Your other host, Indiana and Bree, are here. And we're joined today with Courtney Romano and Benjy Their. Courtney is a creator of many things, but one including we'll start from the beginning. She wrote a book called The First 10 Years and then shot a pilot. And Benjy was involved in Launch Party. It's really very cool book. I haven't read it, but when I was looking at the description, I got very excited and bought it. So we'll talk.
So nice.
We'll talk about it when I finish it. Also, they've created a web series called Kinsley Versus, and they have the filmmaker's dream Instagram companion for that. Every episode, there's something that you guys put together to talk about. So I can't wait to talk about that. Here. Oh, and Benjy is also a Broadway director.
Who is, I hope, able to later on today as a cinematographer. I hope we can talk about kind of the technical of stage to screen and working with actors in that capacity, who are working in both mediums and what you find. So this is really exciting. Obviously we have, actors, directors, writers, Broadway directors, cinematographers represented right now in the group of us. And so I think there's a lot of angles that we can touch on, but I'm just so stoked that both of us are trying to make, both of our teams are trying to make the world of filmmaking and theater more accessible through education, while still being creative. And that is a huge thing for CFA. So I'm excited that this is finally happening. Haeleigh, thank you for putting it together with Courtney. And let's get started with this interview.
Let's talk about stuff.
Queensbird Films is the production company, and everything kind of just falls under that umbrella. I founded it in 2020 when I made my first short film screen test. I made my first short film 3 weeks before lockdown happened in the pandemic times. Yeah. So it's been both a few years and a few lifetimes ago that happened. And we are marketing in the marketing phase of our web series Kinsley Versus. It was a huge project that we took on over the past couple of years. And it is out there, and our podcast, The Breakdown, that was something that I started back in the pandemic as well. When I shot my short film screen test, I wanted to give kind of a behind the scenes look. It was partially, a marketing thing. I mean, it was a lot a marketing thing. But it's also something that Benjy and I both believe in, which is just, sharing information. There's so much information that it's almost impossible to take it all in, and I think that sharing information is really, really important. I also don't think it trumps experiencing information and experiencing the process yourself. So in creating the podcast and in Benjy and I developing it further with this latest season, our goal was really to create a space where we were kind of opening the peeling back the curtain on whatever metaphor I'm going to use, peeling back the curtain on what our process was, not to say this is the way to do it and we are the teachers and you are the students, but more like in a collaborative spirit of saying, there's a lot of information out there. Here's how we've synthesized it. Take what you want, leave what you want. And hopefully go make something from here. That would be the hope.
Would you break down the way that you're doing that?
So in the podcast, we go through about 10 episodes where we are talking about different elements of the process of making Kinsley Versus. So our first episode is about development. How did this idea even come from a script form to a production team that is saying like, yes, let's do this? Like, what are the kind of nebulous moments that happen in between those two points on the path. And then we talk not only about those moments in process, but also with other collaborators that we worked with. So our colorist, our music composer, our editor, costume design. We talk about fundraising and, so we're trying to, we absolutely cannot hit everything. Like, as you guys, I'm sure, are well aware in what you're creating, there's always more to kind of say and pull out of like one moment in a process, but we're trying to choose the things and share about the things that we feel would actually be actionable for other people listening, to say, oh, okay, now that I listen to this conversation with the colorist, I'm not so afraid of reaching out to someone, or I can see how maybe in my own work, especially in cinematography for actors, like maybe actors are not going to be color grading specialists, right? And they don't have to be, but maybe there's something where they get a little nugget from our colorist. They're like, okay, I can apply that to my self tape, or I can apply that to my, whatever the project is that I'm making. So hopefully we're taking processes that we actually went through when we were making Kinsley and kind of present them as an opportunity or an option for other creatives who want to make their own thing.
Yeah. I think it's also like one of those things that you're talking about is like, exactly, it's like you might not become what exactly that guest is that day, but having the context around that, the education or the job that you're doing, can only inform you into like making better decisions on set or off set. And so I love stuff like that. That's why throughout this podcast and what we're doing, we're trying to kind of bring as much diversity in roles and backgrounds so that everyone can kind of take a little, as you would say, nugget for themselves to kind of apply. That's amazing. That's awesome.
I would also add to that artists who are experts at their craft know a ton about what everybody else is doing.
Yes.
And even if that ton does not directly inform what your choices are in your pursuit, it makes you a far superior colleague.
Yeah.
And showing up and doing your job well with the appreciation of what other people around you are doing makes a much better working environment, and also I think a much more invested artist.
Yes. Agreed. And Benjy, your relationship with Courtney, and Courtney, your relationship with Benjy, how did you guys come together and meet and all of this stuff, and then decide to form something so large together where you're like, could be overwhelming at points with how much we want to tackle? And I know, Benjy, that you're a Broadway director as well. And so kind of in the education around filmmaking, how did everything kind of come together for a partnership?
Well, it came together in 2008. It began coming together when we were cast in a play together in college. And I just thought Courtney was the most delightful person in the world. And I was right. And then we actually both were pursuing theater in college, which I should say, like, it's nice to be called a Broadway director. I'm a trained theater director. I've worked on Broadway, but also a lot of other things like not Broadway. And we both come to this place in our lives with a very strong training in theater, and then at different moments we diverged from that path. I think I'll let Courtney, you could talk about your own history, but I think the thing for me that's interesting is I graduated college with a very, very clear idea of what I wanted to do and how I was going to get there. And in many ways, I did it. I went right to the top very fast because I had this singular idea and I was dogged in my pursuit. And it's kind of another conversation, but the interesting thing for me right now is doing an independent film and making our own work. Yeah. I feel like I am now doing the steps that I should have done after college,
right?
Which is to say, like, being scrappy and pursuing things because I love them, not because they're the right things or the best paid things. And it's, since I'm going in the order that I've gone in, I'm like, wait, how are people supposed to do all of this hard stuff at the beginning? I wouldn't know what to do. So it's so interesting to me because in working on Broadway early on in my career, I was exposed to a level of expertise and also to a budget scale and scope that was far beyond where we are now and where I am in my life with Queensbird Films. But I think it's just interesting to me how different the order there. Maybe it's about, I was going to say about the podcast, we've ordered this season sequentially in the filmmaking process loosely, which is to say, like, development happens before we go to set, etc.
Yes.
But you really can listen to the podcast, I think, this season in any order, because it's really a snapshot. It's not about like the recipe per se.
Yeah.
That's there, but it's about like what happens inside each step.
Yeah.
And I think that's true of being an artist in general. There is, fortunately, some days, and other days, unfortunately, not a set path. And the days that it feels maddening, you feel like you want to quit, right? Which is why every good article about somebody who's an overnight sensation begins, they were just about to quit. And then they got their big break, right? But everybody's always just about to quit because it's very hard. And it's very hard to know where you are in the process and what's the next step.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think the nice thing is, like, though we're making something that's called indie, we're also like a wealth of experience to that wouldn't have had.
I know. I think that is actually really interesting, because then you have to be like, okay, all of the collaborators here, years of expertise in their fields. At what point do we still, or do we define, how do we define what indie is, what independent is? And I think that's such an interesting way of kind of viewing, well, a cat's in front of the camera. I think that's also a really interesting way of like viewing how wonderful it is that there's an educational standpoint behind the actual things that you're creating. Because you're not just creating a tool for people to use, you're creating a piece of art that then can have multiple layers behind it. And so how did you kind of start to approach it from an educational standpoint? Was it just the marketing that then you were like, wait, I actually really love doing this?
Yeah, I think for me, when the podcast started with Screen Test in 2020, it was definitely a marketing thing. But I'm also, and Benji and I are both like this, like, we love talking about the craft of things. We love trying to like crack it, like what is it about something that makes it great or makes it terrible or makes it sustainable or unsustainable? I mean, and I like talking about that in terms of brass tacks. How do you make a thing that you can present? And I like talking about that in terms of like, how do you make a life? How do you make a career? And I think as artists, we're moved by that. I think in general, to different shades and different degrees, but that, I think, is why we're compelled to make art in the first place, because we're asking this question to ourselves all the time of like, what are we doing? What is happening right now? Like, I was talking to someone yesterday and he asked me why I make films. And I was like, don't make me answer that. I don't know. Like, this is the question of my life. I probably won't know. And I think as artists, like, that idea that we're not pursuing answers, but we're pursuing questions is what really drives me. And I think what's really beautiful about a podcast format and this kind of like technological connected moment that we're in as a human species is that we get to like ask questions to each other, and we get to pose questions to ourselves, and we get to kind of wonder out loud about stuff. And I think whenever I've listened to people wonder out loud and then also say what they did, I personally have always grown. And so I think Benji and I, and again, I won't speak for Benji, but here I go, I'm going to speak for Benji, both feel compelled to, open that sense of wonder that we each have in our own way about like, how did we get here and what are we doing? And broaden that out and connect to people through it. So, I kind of bristle when people call me an expert. No one's calling me an expert. I'm just saying, if people called me an expert, I'd be like, I am a student. You have called me an expert. And that's not to say that I don't do things well and have a breadth of experience, but I much more love being the student and like the investigator and the explorer. And I think that is, if we could bring a quality of that to a podcast listener, then we've done some good work.
I also think it's funny. I don't know if you remember this. I just thought about this. We we didn't even know what we wanted to make for this season, and we actually recorded 6 conversations that we put on. We never used because we had a whole other version of season 3.
Yes.
That like we structured this whole thing and we came up with this idea, and we didn't. And we got in conversation with another friend of ours, and another colleague, and an artist in her own right, and we recorded a bunch of things, and then we decided that's not what we're doing. So I think we've even approached the podcast season, I hesitate to say this, but I'm going to say it, as a piece of art, which is to say it's been very much a process figuring out what we wanted to do and say.
That's so beautiful.
Funny, because the obvious one, let's talk about how we made Kinsley Versus, is the one that took the longest to get to, when it should have been the first.
Yeah.
A podcast can be art.
Oh, it is. I think it is. I don't know why it feels funny to say it that way, but anyway.
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. That's wonderful.
You're doing so many things and you're putting out so much content. How are you dividing that labor?
Courtney has been the birthplace for the majority of this. Now, the great thing is, as a producer, she didn't have to find me because we had an existing relationship. Right. And a part of in the vocabulary of our relationship was talking about the work we're making. And gradually over the past several years now, it led to this. But even at the beginning of Kinsley Versus, I think I was there as I had informally, like, I was going to work on the project. I just didn't know in what regard. And then it became clear that I should be part of the producing team. But I think it's important to start off by saying that the amount of content we're creating and the content we're creating is the result of very concrete steps that you have taken, Courtney. And so the lion's share of the labor lives with you a lot of the time. Though, of course, when we were in production or throughout different points of this podcast season, one of us has done more or less. But I think the genesis of it is like, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, something that we talked about a while ago when we were like, okay, so Courtney has this thing that she's developing, but like now we're all kind of folding into it and we're creating it. And I love collaborating. I also like to just like be alone and do my own thing and like go down a deep dark hole of something that I'm in, like a topic I'm interested in. But I also like equally love collaborating. So when other people were joining in for Kinsley Versus and stuff, and when Benjy and I said, oh, let's kind of go down this path together, I was thrilled. And one of the things that we said to each other, and I think this could be useful for people listening who are collaborating and creating relationships with other people, is the nature of independent film is like it's not linear, and it's not organized, and it's not there aren't quarters, there's not an annual report. I mean, hopefully you're working towards that kind of structure and stability and all of that, but a lot of it has to do with the amount of energy that you have to put into something. And one of the things that we all talked about before we like really got rolling was, let's understand that at sometimes, Court's going to take the lead on something. Sometimes Benjy is going to take the lead on something. We're going to just let ourselves ebb and flow with that and not get too worried about like who's doing what. And are you pulling this? And are you, that's not in our nature anyway to be like that. But the collaboration was kind of built on this trust that different projects are going to require us to step into different roles. And as long as we were open and discussing that and kind of marking it, even if we don't know at the beginning of the outset of a project how it's going to go, even if it changes in the middle of the project, if we can be like, communicating about that, then we can all kind of split our energy up and our time and our resources and tackle the whole thing together.
Right. And hopefully that there are moments when someone's shouldering a lot, one of us, and the other person says, I need help now. And you just you say it clearly, you identify it so that you're not alone on that.
Right.
Mm.
Like if one of us was like, oh, I'm actually going to have a baby tonight. Can you cover this situation, this upload that I was supposed to do?
Yeah, I love that.
Amazing.
Yeah.
I was wondering, what
Okay, Bree.
the film or the production company? Did you have the production company idea and then come up with films, and then if you had an idea for a film, why create the production company? Why not just do the film?
Good question. One that I ask myself constantly as well. When I had my first child, I have two kids, and when I had my first child, she turned 1, and I was kind of like coming out of the fog of like becoming a new mom, and I had a moment of clarity where I was like, I can't just write the things that I'm writing. I have to direct the things I'm writing. Like it's not going to happen otherwise. I have to like bet on myself and give myself a shot. So that's why I did the short film screen test, and it like that whole film came together in like the pre-production and the production and everything that goes into that came together in like 7 weeks from being like, I have to make a film to having it all shot.
Yeah.
So again, short film, like big caveat there, obviously it's not a feature.
Actually, also an enormous effort.
Yes.
Right. Like 7 weeks is fast. That's very fast. If you took a year to make your short film, that would also be a reasonable amount of time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Would you tell us a little bit about the Instagram you have that is at Kinsley versus .series, that is a companion to the Kinsley web series that you have? I guess we should speak about the Kinsley web series as well.
Yeah.
The web series is just to drive people to our Instagram account.
It works.
Well, we knew that a big part of making Kinsley Versus was going to be getting money to make Kinsley Versus, because we were looking at the scope of it and what it would actually take, and part of getting the funding for that is letting people know what you're doing. So we wanted to approach the Instagram, from as early on as possible. So we weren't just like, hey, everybody, we're here now with an Instagram and a crowdfunding page. Aren't you excited? Because no one's excited about that. And so we tried to do that. And also, I will say, we were joking a little bit about manifesting, right? There is a little bit, I think, with marketing and social media that is a little manifesty. You know what I mean? Meaning like you're putting out there, Benji's like, no, Courtney. You're putting out there what you want people to see and think about your process, even as you might have like some internal doubts or challenges that you're not putting out there. And not to say that our Instagram is about displaying something that isn't true and actually happening, but there is something cool about sharing behind the scenes footage, like breaking down certain we now, since the series has launched, we have some reels and TikToks that are about how the episode, like after the episode, kind of anatomy of the episode stuff, talking about how it was made or why a decision was made. And I think, to our point earlier about like creating a collaborative space, it's kind of fun to market that way. You kind of build the audience as you go. And that was always the goal, was to make sure that we were building an audience around this series so that people would watch it, and so that people could find it, and so that people felt connected to it in a way that wasn't just watch my series because I'm asking you to, but because they were maybe compelled to out of themselves to want to, spend some time with us on YouTube.
I feel like it's such an interesting and kind of revolutionary idea, because you're building an audience, but it's not just that you're building a fan base. You're building an educated audience. It's not that you're trying to create a show that is tricky and people don't know how it was done. You're showing people exactly how you've made elements of this show. So it's a very it's for filmmakers, it feels like.
Yeah. And I would say that I think this is something I've actually been thinking a lot about lately. I used to feel that if I showed any of that of my personal work, if I showed any of the behind the scenes, or I, peeled back the curtain and like said what was really happening, or this is the actual challenge, or this is how I did it, or whatever, it somehow took away from the art. And I think that this is a mindset that isn't mine. Like, I don't think that I naturally feel that way. I think it's something that we have generally thought about in filmmaking, because it is such a very gate-kept industry, and positions of influence and access to these kinds of decisions, even, obviously at a bigger scale than we're making them, but are typically not, you don't see behind the scenes that much. You don't see the executives having those conversations. You don't see all of that post-production work. Typically, you haven't, at least when I was growing up, right? And now I feel like it's actually cool. I hesitate to use that word because I generally am not striving to be cool, but I think when I see other people do that, it enhances my feeling for the work itself. And I want to dig into it, and I want to see it, and I want to engage with it. And so, I hope that educational aspect, or that like kind of revealing aspect, is something that makes people feel more connected to the art, which is ultimately, the goal.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you about choosing your collaborators for that series. So, relationships to them prior, what was the interview process like? Why did you end up going with who you went with, and kind of, the world around bringing other people into your team?
And do you want to take that?
Sure. I think, it's a combination of a lot of things. Obviously, Courtney wrote and directed it, and as a producing team, there's 4 of us: Courtney, Allison Kohler, who's also the costume designer, and Sarah States, who actually plays Edie in the film, and then me, and then I am a producer. Yes, I am a producer, and and we each. So Courtney and Sarah knew each other from Screen Test. Allie, Courtney, and I all went to college together. And I guess I'm starting off with us as producers because I think Courtney knew Sarah was going to play a role in it as an actor, and Courtney that Allie was going to design it. And I had expressed interest in supporting your process, but I think each of us came to you individually and said, I think I want to produce it. And so suddenly the producing team was.
Love that.
Yeah, it was. And I think, and then I think as, a crew and the creative team and an ensemble of actors, it was really about like combing through the network of who we know and where we want to also broaden our network and go through a traditional casting process or interview process, which so there's a bunch of ways we got to people, but including in traditional ways, which is interviewing or auditioning, and then also through like kind of lovely, spontaneous, unplanned, like, oh, this actor we shot the series in 2 parts in September and January. And in the interim of that, we made that decision largely based on finances. But in the interim, one of the actors who played a significant role booked a national tour and couldn't finish the series. And so,
oh my gosh.
Yeah, so actually we booked we found another actor, and Courtney, I mean, this is I think one thing that's kind of interesting about the film, that it barely tracks that we change actors in the middle. And also it was great because we decided when we had to change actors, I think our approach was just like, oh, we'll just sort of do it. It was nothing, we didn't belabor like now it was helpful that it wasn't Kinsley, right? We would have had a different problem had it been the lead character, but I still think the approach, which is maybe something about making independent art, which is like, embrace the thing that's in front of you. If you have to change actors, and don't try and shoehorn the new decision into place. It will fall into place if you let it fall into place.
Yeah.
And Courtney, we were brilliant about that as a director and as a writer. But I think what was the other thing I wanted to say? Oh, I don't know. We changed a bunch of people between shooting shooting round 1 and round 2. Mostly the second time out of necessity, not because we wanted to, but
Yeah, people had
it all worked out beautifully.
It all worked out. A lot of people that we changed to, like, we had a new DP. We had actually a whole new camera team the second round. And we got that camera team from the first camera team.
That's great.
Yeah. And what's actually kind of funny is that part that we had to recast. We recast it twice.
Yeah.
The person that we cast, they got sick 4 days or 3 days before we were supposed to shoot. And so then we cast again. So to Benji's point, we also wanted to make sure we're not pretending. I was like, all right, well, I know the writer. Let me write a couple lines that addresses this, and then we'll move on. And Benji's right. If it were a different script, if it were a different character, maybe it wouldn't have worked out like that. But it was this feeling of, we're making everything, we are building the plane as we're taking off. And this is one of those elements. Just like one of those elements is, will we get the funding for round 2? Because we basically got the funding, I want to say 5 days before we were supposed to shoot round 2. Like,
oh my gosh.
Terrifying.
But I also think that early on, when we were in development for the first round of shooting, and questions started to come up where you and I would be brainstorming on the phone about how to handle things, I really, really felt strongly that my role as producer, within reason, was to say, Courtney, we need to make the film that you want to make, right? And that's why you put producers in place. It's our job to support you and help facilitate the logistics and the practical approach, but you have to do the thing you want to do, and you have to see and choosing to see those small challenges as like opportunities, which is so cliche, but very, very helpful if you can.
That's so wonderful. And that's such a good reminder for everybody about the role of a producer. It's not just the logistics and the admin and, where the creative producing comes in, but also the support of your team and your heads of department. So that's so wonderful.
Courtney, since you were writing and you probably have shots in mind as you're writing, but then you bring a DP on board, what's the collaboration process like if you already envision how a scene is shot? And then like, what are those first conversations like when they must read it with a certain vision? What's that very first coming together like?
I try, as I'm sure many people do, directors do, to just have a ton of references. And when I share a reference, I'm not saying I want it shot like this. I'm saying, here's the vibe. Here's what I'm getting out of this. So basically the reference works as a translation from my brain to their brain. It's like, here's the language that we can work with. And so, a lot of the stuff that I was inspired by, some of my references were Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, I May Destroy You, even some like kind of writing references to Breakfast at Tiffany's. Like it kind of like spanned a lot of different genres and shots. I knew the feel, and I come from I know that there are some directors that come from a more technical background, and there's some that come from a more narrative acting background. Because I was an actor, I come from that narrative acting background. And I know what I want to express. But I also know what I don't know, which is the camera. Like that is not where I am. That is not where I am the expert. Yeah. But so what I would do with both DPs would be like, this is the feel, this is what I'm thinking. What do you think we can accomplish? And they'd say, okay, yeah, that works. Or, you know what? I know what you're going for. I think we can do it better this way. Or Courtney, we are running out of time, my friend. Okay, all right. So let's go to plan B. So it was a constant kind of connection with the DPs to say, here are my hopes and dreams. What do I need to do to help you execute that? And like, how can you help me execute that? And actually, one thing that our cinematographer Alexa said to me in the first round of shooting, which I had never thought about before, but she said, I appreciate you after the cut going to your actors first, because I need to go to my camera team and we need to discuss stuff, and it gives us a moment. And she was like, and she was saying that in terms of like, and I guess I'm sharing that not because I'm like, wow, good job, Courtney, but it's nothing that I ever thought would affect. I just didn't think about it. And so when she pointed it out, right, I was just like, okay, this is great information. I'm always going to do that. I'm going to go tend to the actors. You're going to go tend to your team. And then we're going to come back and say, all right, this is what I need. This is what I need. Let's make that happen.
Yeah. And it's also wonderful because you start to think about it. Like, I always speak in pillars of like the creative, technical, and practical. And whatever we're doing is kind of attacking those three pillars. And what's wonderful about that is not only are you going to the people that need you the most on set, but which is kind of like taking care of the practical and creative, but from a technical standpoint, you're saving time because you're giving people the direction, whether it be I'm as a DP going to my crew and giving them what's next, and you're going to your actors and you're saying, this is what we're going to do. This is great. Or, let's make this change. They're able to work on that while then you guys come back together to make the next plan. And it's things like that on set that save so much time and are also just so wonderfully efficient, but also just like support people in a really beautiful way. So I love that. And I love that she called that out because it is kind of the realization that you're like, oh, I was already doing that, but like, that's great. And this is the context as to why I do it.
Right.
Awesome.
And I can also, her saying that to me also made me realize that next time around, and in that time too, but I want to, as a director, I want to say to the crew and the heads of department as we're working together, like, how can we communicate best on set? Because you're so right that efficiency is boring in some ways, but it's like sexy in other ways, because if you're efficient, you get your day done. Oh, come on, like, let's go out for drinks. Let's always have 3 hours. Yes.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Also, I think that
you get your day done is something I've never heard before. You get your day done and you go out for drinks?
Yeah.
Oh, right.
So that's so sexy. That's amazing. I would love that.
Yeah.
Right,
and then Benji, what were you gonna say?
I was just gonna say about I'm thinking about this as a producer, but also as a director. Communication with the people that you're working with, it just can never be underestimated. And I think where there's an informed group of people working together, there is a much better, there's a greater opportunity for good art, and also the vibe on set is infinitely better, right? Because people are aware, and you can't assume that people should know ever. And even if you're like, oh, we've been filming for 3 days and we never clarified this, great, clarify it on the 3rd day. Even if it's your last day, it's never too late. That's one thing I found actually, it was a real pleasure. It was like we were in really cramped spaces a lot of our shoot, and we tried really hard to make sure that we were communicating really effectively about what was happening and what the expectations were, so that the challenges that were given weren't formidable, but we could still have fun inside them. And I think I hope everybody did, but I think that's something that did happen.
Being on the other side of the camera and all of that, I have seen incredible actors do incredible things, and I have learned so much from the actors that I've worked with because of being in this other position that I would not have gotten, I don't think, if I was working alongside them. There's something about watching them where I feel, as where I am in my life, I'm like, oh, I don't think I knew what acting was until I saw people really do it. I, as a young performer, I was constantly showing what I was doing. I was not in my body. A lot of that stuff is like my own personal history, right? And so as my personal history develops and my experience with my own life and the questions that I'm asking in my own life develop, I understand what it is to re-enter my own body and my own experience. And then I have this profound respect for actors who will so willingly and vulnerably be in their body, be in their mind, be in their emotions, be in their like every essence, and just allow that to be captured on film or through an audience member watching them on stage. So I think my whole general feel for acting is like, I just want to like hug actors and say thank you and just kind of, I don't know, like I am in awe of them. So I think, sure, it would be fun to try to embody that myself at some point. But I have just learned so much from watching really incredible people work.
So wonderful.
Wow, yeah, there is something to be said for taking a job or doing a job that is not your job, that you feel like is not yours. There's so many actors out there, I think, who believe that they have to be laser focused on the one thing and just be an actor and do acting. And the problem is you're going in with blinders on. Then you end up on set and you don't know what anyone does or what anyone needs from you, and you're also missing such a great opportunity to watch actors who are doing these incredible things, because watching can teach you so much. Like they tell you in class, you sit and you watch and you're learning a lot, and you can do that at work too.
Yeah.
It's curiosity, right? It's like being able to stay curious is like the number one rule of being an artist, right? It's like, be curious. And I think a lot of us can get laser focused. I can get laser focused. And then I'm like grinding out a draft of my feature script. And I'm like, what are you trying to do right now, Court? Put it down, walk away, and come back to it when you're not like so tense about it. So I think, yeah, some actors, I think, being on set in different roles, that'd be really helpful. Some actors, maybe they put it down for 10 years. Some actors, maybe they put it down for 2 days. Like everyone's got to find their own rhythm and the thing that's going to help them to stay curious and stay open, because ultimately, like that's where we get the magic from, I think.
That's great.
Yeah.
I also, it's so funny because I was talking to Haeleigh, Bree, and I were shooting this new YouTube series we're doing called The Drop-In, which I think Haeleigh can probably best define after, because she's like kind of zoned in on it at the moment. But Haeleigh, is hosting, and then Bree and I were behind camera, and we were talking briefly. Well, Haeleigh was with the guest, and Bree was saying like it's wonderful. Like you can get so overwhelmed with the amount of acting classes that kind of actors are supposed to be taking, but it's when you like step aside from it for a second and get to do the inner work and reflect and be like, let me just live life and experience it. And life gets hectic, and I think a lot of that informs the decisions you're making on set just as much as kind of the class would, just in different capacities. And so I just love when you said that, because actors are always like, this class, and I'm taking this class and this. But when you step aside from it, you're like, I'm not taking a class right now, but it's okay, because I like have all of this knowledge that I'm applying. It was kind of like a wonderful thing to hear.
Yeah. And it's like we were talking about earlier, having a full life helps all of the work.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Very cool.
Even as too.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. You like how you're informing the decisions you're making on set is because at the end of the day, like you could be technical in your role, or you could be more creative, or, anything, but it's the things that happen in your life that inform the decisions that you're making on set and make you a better artist.
Like if you're just taking classes all the time, if you're only taking acting classes, well, what experiences are you pulling from if you only ever are taking acting classes?
Right. It's the balance of input and output. Sometimes when I get really stuck with something, my husband will be like, just go be an audience member. Stop with the output, get some more input, and that's what I think we're naturally inclined to do as artists, no matter if you're an actor, a cinematographer, a director, whoever. It's like we're naturally inclined to engage with things, and engagement is a conversation. Engagement is a back and forth. So it's like, we think because of the culture that we live in and the time that we live in, that we have to like output, but that's actually like, it's paradoxical in some ways, but it's like, no, we don't. We actually have to take in a lot to be able to do anything else.
You have to feed yourself.
Benjy, I find it really interesting because I don't get to have a lot of conversations with theater world in general, but also theater directors. And so with the coaching practice that you have, as well as kind of your experience as a theater director, what are you seeing with actors that are working between both formats, and how kind of do you accommodate that when coaching?
My approach as a coach, which is to say is slightly different than directing, only because I try really hard to help actors make choices that make sense from the perspective of being an actor. So that you're not trying to look at your performance with a third eye, right? Mm-hmm. You're trying to figure out what works from inside. And so what's true of that, regardless of the medium, is starting with the script and starting with the language. Language is key. And speaking of like taking time away from something, learn your lines and then walk away. Don't ever, if you're submitting for an audition, don't learn your lines and then tape. Because what can happen in 4 hours, or even better in the course of a day, is your body and your mouth lives with the language. And language, for most effective performances, language needs to be secondary. But what it really means is you need to be deeply, deeply intentional about the language in order for it to be secondary.
Right.
And so I think in terms of moving between genres, it's interesting because we're returning to in-person auditioning now, but there's so much more self-taping. I think, I think one thing is like knowing when you tape that you have foundational standards, which is to say like your lighting, your sound, your frame, all of that is excellent and requires minimal maintenance on the part of you as the actor. Because if you are uncertain about those things, regardless if you're submitting for theater or for film, you are taking yourself out of the running immediately if you're sending somebody a tape that's less than, excellent. And largely you should be able to turn it on and your frame should stay the same. That said, I think that since there tends to be a preference towards like psychologically realistic style in terms of acting, and that seems to be the case in both media. And so I think I guess it's not so much about like a different style, but if you're submitting for film, I would do 2 takes of your audition, not because you should splice together 2 takes. You should never do that. But you should do 2 takes because you as an actor should be making a choice about what's most effective. Now, as the theater, when you're auditioning for theater, by and large, we want to see more of your body, not less. And typically, it's safe to say like your waist up is your frame. But I think as an actor auditioning for film, become accustomed to what the frame does to your performance so that you can decide what's most effective given the scenario.
Right. Yeah. That's wonderful. Yeah, I totally agree from just even a DP standpoint, because of the tools that we have on set. I don't think that should just be reserved for set, because you're telling a story. We've had actors on, Alexandra Wright being one, who said, I feel blessed to just live within the character. Even if I don't get the role, I feel blessed to be able to work within a character and tell their story for that short amount of time. And so it's how are we informing the technical tools, the practical approach, and the creative decisions, once again, my pillars, into telling that story for you to possibly get that job, but if not, the necessary tools in order to tell it. So I adore that idea.
I would also say, sorry,
No.
I'd also say that if you're an actor and you're going through a bit of a dry spell, don't wait for your next audition to put yourself on tape. Put yourself on tape once a week and get used to it. So it's not a foreign experience. And also that's your own class, putting yourself on tape.
And you'll just get better, which is great.
And talk about what you'll end up doing is educating yourself a little bit what other people do on set, right? The experience of lighting yourself and making sure your audio is good, etc.
Yes.
Framing.
That's excellent. How can people find you, Benjy, for coaching?
You can actually just email me. It's benjyshaw@gmail.com. And I'll
benjyshaw@gmail.com.
Yeah, Benjy with a Y.
We'll put it in the notes.
Yeah.
So everyone can find you. Oh, amazing.
Yeah.
We love that. Courtney, how can we find you?
Why don't we find me on TikTok right now? Courtney.Romano. I do a bunch of
Romano.
Yeah. I've made my Instagram private because I just like posting pictures of my kids and no one really cares about that except me. So go find me on TikTok. And if people want to watch the Kinsley versus series, that is on YouTube.
Great.
And I'm definitely going to recommend big time that while you watch Kinsley versus, you also follow @Kinsley versus.series on Instagram so that you can have that dream filmmakers episode companion. We'll link it all for everyone, but it feeds me, and I think it'll feed a lot of people.
Oh, thank you
so much for joining us today, you guys.
Yes, please.
Just realized we've not really ever spoken about this. At the end of each episode of the podcast, we talk to artists who are not who did not work on Kinsley versus, and they each speak for about 2 minutes about their process. And there's actors, and there's composers, and there's producers featured, and I think feeds nicely into what we've been talking about. So if you are bored by the majority of the episode, fine, go to the final 2 minutes. It's a little bit of an Easter egg that I've enjoyed producing.
That's perfect.
Yeah,
thank you.
It keeps it really fun too, so that's great. I love that.
Really
thank
exciting.
you guys so much for joining us. I'm so happy we're able to do this call.
Yes, thank you.
Really exciting.
Thank you so much. It's so fun to just meet other people doing it, and I hope we can, work together, talk together, keep it going.